Hey everyone, welcome to the UX Rocket interview series where we get to hear and learn from industry experts on issues and topics related to UX design. I had the great opportunity to speak with Peter Merholz, who is a consultant, advisor, and educator focused on design leadership and design organizations. He was a co-founder of Adaptive Path, which is a world-renowned UX firm, and he's worked with some great companies such as Groupon, OpenTable, Jawbone, Capital One, and more. Peter's also the co-author of the book Org Design for Design Orgs, Building and Managing In-House Design Teams, which I highly recommend not just for designers, but really for anyone who is in a leadership position within a company. I hope you enjoy this interview. Peter, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me about design and about your book. I know that you are involved in so many things and you're a very busy person, so I really do appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So to begin, could you just tell us maybe a little bit about yourself, maybe a little bit about your background and maybe some of the things that you're currently doing?
Yeah, so I'm Peter Merholz. The reason I'm on this, having this conversation is that about 5 years ago, I co-wrote a book called Org Design for Design Orgs. And for the past few years, have really been focused my work on helping companies make their design organizations more effective. Before then, I'd been a design executive working in-house. Before that, I had been a founder of Adaptive Path, a user experience firm. And so, but my situation, as my situation evolved, I realized that getting the organization right was so crucial to delivering good experiences that's where I just wanted to focus all of my efforts. So for the past couple of years, I've been an independent consultant. I typically embed myself with one company and then take projects on with others. So in this past year, I've supported Wells Fargo Bank, the New York Times, Cloudflare, Zendesk, Wish, the shopping app, either with consulting or workshops and facilitating. Something I've been doing a lot of is facilitating conversations within a design team, helping them define themselves, develop their identity. So that's what I'm about.
That's awesome. So let's talk about that book. This is a book you co-wrote with Kristen Skinner.
That's right.
Org Design for Design Orgs, Building and
right.
Managing In-House Design Teams. And, you know, I read this about a year ago after it was recommended to me by someone in my professional network. And I just read it through again in preparation with this conversation. And man, I mean, clearly a lot of experience and a lot of thought was behind this. And throughout this book, you present, in my opinion, from a very authoritative and convincing way, this blueprint for effective design organization within a company, from the role of design within an organization, how best structure teams, the type of people you want filling the roles on those teams, and the different types of work these people may do. You even go through how to hire the right people, and you essentially map out an internal career path that these employees could follow. This book it's robust, and it's very,
and it's not even 200 pages.
I know. Yeah, it's a good read. It's detailed, it's challenging. And so I guess my first question would be, why did you write this book?
After leaving Adaptive Path, I became a design executive, and I was helping companies leading design teams. And after the second or third company where I had that experience, I realized there were no resources for me as a design executive to figure out how to do my job. So when I'm a designer, there's plenty of resources to help me figure out how to be a better designer. There's classes I could take. There's books I could read on design methods. How do I do better user research? How do I build a better persona? How do I do better prototyping? All that kind of stuff. Like, that's all settled. But as a design executive, in particular, when I was running the design team at Groupon, I came in, I had a team of 25. I was told I need to grow it, and basically told, okay, good luck. And I didn't know the best ways to recruit and hire. I didn't know the best ways to structure this organization. Like, this was in 2012, 2013, where you were starting to see designers get embedded in product teams more and more. And that didn't sound right to me. So I ended up having to create my own way forward, drawing from what I had developed in terms of our practice at Adaptive Path, and what are the conditions that lead to good design, and then figuring out how to embed those within just an in-house design practice. And so as I was figuring this stuff out, I started giving public presentations about it at conferences that I would be invited to speak at. Because, I've been speaking for 20 plus years now, and I talk about whatever I'm up to. And so this is what I was up to. So that's what I started talking about. And I would get this remarkable response from other design leaders who were like, you're the only person talking about these organizational matters, and how to structure teams, and what kind of people to have, and how do they work. Like everything else is process and case studies. And so given that response, I realized that I had enough to write a book about. Like there was something here where I could write a book. Kristen, on a parallel path, had similar experiences. She and I had worked together at Adaptive Path. She stayed at Adaptive Path, which then got acquired by Capital One, and continued to build out a program management practice there. And she had started giving talks and getting that kind of response. And we just realized that there was a thing here that we could do together to get these ideas out of our head and help this broader community grapple with what does it mean to build in-house design teams, particularly ones as they scale. So, it's a long answer, but the short answer is people were just super positive in responding to just even these initial demonstrations of this thinking. And so that gave us the confidence that there would be an audience for this. This book sells as well today, 5 years later, as it did the day we launched it. It's been remarkably steady. I keep waiting for it to go down because it's 5 years old and maybe there's new thinking. Nope, it's just, I don't know how many copies, but whatever, I get the royalty checks, and they basically have been the same for 3 or 4 years now. When you first sell it, you get an initial hit, but then it's just had this plateau. Even though, and maybe this is something you want to talk about, there's a lot, however exhaustive it feels or complete it feels, there's a lot that I've learned since doing this that begs for a second edition. I don't know when I'll ever have the time.
I was going to ask about that. I might ask about that later, a second edition. So to me, it's clear who I would want to get this book in the hands of. But as you were writing this book, who were you picturing as the ideal person for consuming this? In other words, who is the target audience for this book?
We had two targets. One were fellow peer design leaders, right? So the people who, when I would give a talk at a conference, would come up to me and say, thank you so much for this. I need more like this. Do you know of blogs or resources or books that address conversations like this? So this would be other, directors or vice presidents of design teams out there. So that was one audience. The other audience is, so I wrote this book largely after I got laid off from a company. Their fortunes turned sour. And so I got some severance, and I was able to use that time to start writing the book. But then during that process, I also started looking for my next gig. And living in Silicon Valley, I live in Oakland, California, I'm talking to a lot of tech companies. And I had this idea that I would be someone that you would want to bring in when you're around 7, 8, 9, 10 designers, and you're ready to invest and double in that. There's a thing that happens, we talk about it in the book, where you go from a design team to a design org. Yep. And you need a different kind of leader than the one that you might have had up until then. So I was having all these conversations with CEOs of startups or VPs of products at startups. And I realized none of them really understood what the actual job was to lead a design team and what a design org should be. So they were my other audience, was non-designers, the organizational leaders who would be building out a design competency within their organization and had no idea where to begin. No, I don't think any of them have ever read this book, or very, very few have actually read this book, but they were an audience I wanted to make sure this book could satisfy if they were to pick it up, because I just found that this is a group, these CEOs or heads of product have a lot of sway and influence and power in their organization. Many of them want to do the right thing, and they just don't know what they don't know. And so particularly some of the introductory material in the book, and how we approached it was trying not to only speak within our community and use a lot of jargon and a lot of inside baseball kind of talk, but was meant to be something that a non-designer, as long as you read those first two chapters, which kind of create this context for understanding how we perceive design, you should then be able to follow the rest of the book.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess digging in a little bit to some of the content within the book. So I guess the first thing is you state that the core opportunity for design is to inject humanism into the work, and that the best design products and services don't simply solve problems, but connect deeply with people. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, my background is in anthropology. That's my degree. And the founders of Adaptive Path, none of us had design degrees, but none of us were technical either. We were historians and journalists and filmmakers, right? And I think there's a quality to this digital product design that speaks to these humanities. If you want to think about, if you back in college, taking classes in the humanities. And there's this quality of design that embraces that humanism. And as companies start building internal design teams, the reason they're doing it is not for humanism. They're building internal design teams because they recognize that design helps make better software product. They don't necessarily understand why, but something about usability and some people designing things that people will actually like, and they want that capability working with their engineers and product people. But what you get when you hire designers is you get people who have a humanistic perspective. They start with an empathetic point of view. They start with thinking about the person on the other end of the tool, screen, whatever, and how can we serve that person through what it is we're making. And that's not something that these companies realize they're getting when they bring in designers. And what's important about it is that a humanistic view of the world runs in pretty stark contrast to the kind of mechanistic view of the world that you get when you have a business background or an engineering background, right? Business and engineering tend to be very analytical, very metrics driven, numbers driven, quantitative, reductive. It's a lot about breaking things into little elements and then building them back up again, which has a role in this process, but can't be all of it. And what design does is design brings this humanistic perspective that is generative, creative, holistic, big picture, qualitative, that's very different than that mechanistic perspective. And that's actually the value, is this whole new way of thinking about the world and approaching problem solving. You want that difference of approach because that now gives you more ways of tackling things. The problem is that mechanistic approach is usually the dominant culture, right? Your CEOs and your heads of product or whatever come from business backgrounds and engineering backgrounds. And design usually has to figure out how to accommodate to that. And if design over accommodates to that, now you've lost the reason for design. If all design is doing is churning out assets in a production line, it's now become mechanistic. And what's the point? You're not actually getting that value of design as a mode of inquiry, as a mode of asking, inquiry means asking questions, probing, trying to figure things out. And so, I call my company, my one-person company, it's called Humanism at Scale. I very much see design as this means of bringing this whole other language and mindset and approach to problem solving into these companies. And ideally making these companies thus better suited at delivering value to the people kind of at the other end of those transactions.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you talk a lot about that in your book. So thinking about, you touched on it a little bit, but thinking about design's role within product development. In your book, you give an example of Rob Bruner, who was the founder of the design consultancy Ammunition. His view of design's role in the product development shifted from design being just that one step in the chain to design being a function that is infused across the entire development of a product. So it impacts marketing, it impacts engineering and sales, support management. Could you speak into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, you basically covered it. The difference is there is this kind of, for lack of a better phrase, 20th century view of design, particularly born of product design, like physical product design, that starts with as the link in a chain that starts with strategy, right? Your senior most executives figuring out this is the direction we're going to go in, and these are our goals as a company. And then those goals are handed to a marketing team, and the marketing team figures out how to translate those goals into a set of requirements based on what the market wants, right? How can we realize those goals in the market? What new products and capabilities could we bring into the market to realize those goals? Then marketing has the set of requirements now, and they hand that off to design, who figures out how to put shape around those requirements to create an offering that satisfies the marketing needs. And then once design is done, that design is basically now create a set of specifications that can get handed over to engineering, who can figure out now how do we build that thing, right? And so so design was this discrete moment in time where you received requirements, sometimes called a brief, and you spat out your specifications, your mocks, your wireframes, your models, whatever it is for your foam models, if you're thinking physical product, to engineering to then figure out. And what Rob pointed out is what he started to see in his business. So his business started as an industrial design firm, but really kind of expanded into being just a design company, not unlike IDEO or Frog. And he saw customers coming to him not for design as give us, we're going to give you this brief and you're going to return with a set of specifications, but can you help us figure out what it is we should be doing? Can you help us figure out what the market wants? Like, can you help us figure out how we can better engineer and manufacture and sell and support our products? And clients were realizing, and I think some of the credit to this goes to the development and spreading of design thinking. Whatever you think of that phrase, notwithstanding, that concept has been quite pervasive. And I think a lot of executives were like, oh, so design isn't necessarily just this link in a chain. It's a way of approaching problems and maybe can help us have a better strategy, develop better requirements, do better design, build better products, engage with our customers through sales better, so give them support better. And they recognize design as a practice, not just this as an activity that you can engage in, not just this phase of a process.
I guess one follow-up question I have with that is, so how would someone within an organization who is not in senior leadership, how would they promote or work towards this shift in mindset and the role of design? Is it possible?
That's tough. But there's potential there, right? And it's one of education and evangelism for this type of approach. It's a classic change management challenge. So if you're a senior lead designer in an organization and you think that you have a set of practices that can help influence other things than what you're focused on, it's a matter of finding opportunities where you can start doing that work in small chunks with trusted colleagues outside of your world. You hear about a problem and you're like, you know what? This is the kind of thing that are we together?
Yep.
Shoot. Oh, there we go.
Yep.
Sorry. Had a little pause there. This is the kind of thing. So, you realize there might be, I'm trying to think of a good example of this, but you might recognize you could team think through something, or facilitating a design thinking process, and it will be small, and you'll bring some people in, and you'll run them through a workshop, and you'll lead them to some set of understanding, And then you do that a couple times in small ways with teams near you, and you'll start to, one hopes, you start building this awareness of how you can use design to tackle non-design problems, right? So that's one way. That's the classic way. Start small, find little things that you can work on, and start building kind of momentum that way. Another is to locate in your senior leadership a potential sponsor. Right? Is there someone in senior leadership who seems like they would be willing to support this kind of effort, who's a little bit more forward thinking, and can they give you cover to maybe run up the flagpole and try something a bit more bold? So there's strategies, but to be clear, without leadership really providing that space, ultimately you're going to get stuck. Yeah. So ultimately, it's all about how do I help the leadership recognize this opportunity so that they can then kind of raise the ceiling of possibility that I can fill in. So it's a change management problem. I was on a session last week with I was teaching a workshop for a conference based in Sweden. So a lot of people kind of in Europe, and one of the people there mentioned that they'd been at their company like 19 years, and it probably took like 6, 7, or 8 years of them continuing to evangelize design before it stopped being seen simply as make it pretty, make it work function, and something that could be more strategic. So sometimes it's a slog.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. Thank you for all that. So I really appreciated your section in the book on establishing and upholding standards of quality as a responsibility of a design organization to create and then communicate and uphold. Could you talk a little bit about that? What does that look like? Are these bullet points of guiding principles, and who's involved in creating these standards? And then I guess, how do you communicate this with your company?
Yeah, so this could be an entire hour-long conversation on its own. And I recently wrote a blog post on petermerholz.com about defining quality. The blog post is titled something like, "What is good design anyway?" And this is a challenge I've been poking at for a while, because the idea of defining quality for design is hard. Defining quality for engineering is super easy. No bugs, uptime, it's performant, the things respond quickly. Like, engineering is a walk in the park compared to defining quality in design, which quality in design usually is something along the lines of, I know it when I see it. It's this where you're just like, yeah, that's good and that's not good. How do you know? Because I like it. So I've been looking at how do we create that kind of approach of I know it when I see it doesn't scale, right? Because what happens is, I support teams that have 100, 200 designers sometimes. And if you don't have an organizational wide awareness of quality, what happens is you have a lot of local understanding of quality. So you have this team over here that, based on some design leader defines quality one way, and this team defines another way, and a third team defines another way. And that might be okay, at least day to day. But then what if they all, you now have work coming together and the quality is uneven. And so the customer experience feels weird because you go from something that had a different understanding of what quality was. Or what if I'm a designer on this team and now I'm going to move over to that team for whatever reason, right? People move fluidly. And it's like, wait a moment, you guys have a totally different way of defining quality and trying to figure out what good enough is. And so one of the things that I've been working on is developing a framework for articulating quality that can scale with your organization.
Right.
And there are a lot of components to it. I've gotten up to 8 or 9 by now. Let me see if I can remember them without looking at the blog post. Usability heuristics. That's kind of an obvious one. Your classic Nielsen heuristics. Those work for software in almost any context, time immemorial. So those are a great place to start. And so relate to quality? Does your software, how does it handle these heuristics? Does it deliver on the 9 or 10 classic usability heuristics? Brand personality characteristics. So does what you're building reflect who you are as a company and as an organization, the personality you want to project? I think that's important because software is where these software experiences are where people receive. That's the relationship they're having with us much of the time is through the software.
Mm-hmm.
So you want that software to take part in that relationship and provide that the perhaps more emotional qualities that you're seeking within a brand relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Experience principles, right? So this is more, if brand is inside out, experience principles are outside in. What is the quality of experience that your customers want to have in using your tools? So classic example that I've experienced is in financial services, banking, brokerage firms, where it can feel like a lot of numbers coming at you, a lot of complexity, right? So a classic experience principle in that realm is put me in control, or make me feel like I'm in control, or make it simple, right? So that's not necessarily a brand quality, but that is a quality that your customers are asking for in terms of being able to feel like they can take charge of their financial life as opposed to being overwhelmed by finances.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 3. Design systems, and that used to just have design guidelines and those types of things. Now we have design systems,
Yep.
but essentially tools that help spread a broad understanding of what quality is, through baking in at least good enough design into interface components and having those spread. So at least you have some degree of consistency across an experience. I've been thinking more about, it kind of relates to design systems, but inclusive design practices and accessibility guidelines is an area of quality that is often ignored, but is super important. And I think we're becoming more and more aware of how important it is. I'm not going to tell you user-centered design practices because those are kind of expected now in the way we work. And also process doesn't mean quality. But I do think because inclusive design practices are so underappreciated, being very explicit and intentional about how you embrace inclusive design, and then using accessibility standards like the WCAG to validate your designs are important way of measuring quality, right? If it's really good, except 20% of the audience simply can't use it, well, how good is it? Critique practices is something. So this is a process one, but something I think about, which is inclusive, and I call them inclusive critique practices. I think my suspicion is that a lot of critique happening within design teams is badly done. And so making sure you are following smart critique practices, there's good books about this. One that Aaron Irizarry co-wrote that I'm spacing on the name of right now. But there's actually some, Scott Birkin has written about it. There's a lot of good writing about doing critique well and making sure you're following that. And engaging in critique. Critique is one of those opportunities for power dynamics to play a potentially tricky role. And so making sure that your critique practices don't exacerbate uneven power dynamics within a team, and instead make sure that every voice is heard and that everyone's kind of opinion and contribution is taken in and respected is important. And so everything I've shared with you are attempts to make the conversation around quality a little less subjective and more objective, right? We have these standards and practices and heuristics and principles that we can say, does this design meet that or not? Yes or no? So that's where you start. But design is subjective. At the end of the day, there's always going to be a subjective quality to design. And so the last element of quality that I encourage folks to develop is essentially just a gallery of good work. And
I remember you talking about this in your book, that this is good stuff.
Ideally work that you've built within your team, but if it's a new team or you're just not satisfied, like a new leader who's like, we actually aren't doing good work out in the world. and you have a gallery of this work where you explain why it's good. Yep. And through that becomes almost a cultural conversation where you're helping, where the design leaders are helping the other designers understand what it is we value in terms of design at this organization, through the way we talk about it, through the way we critique it, through the way we criticize it, explain it. And so now, as a designer, because for me the measure of success is, can a 25-year-old junior designer, and I first thought about this when pre-pandemic, when I would talk to a design leader in the Bay Area, but they would have teams in somewhere in Poland or Dublin or something. Can a 25-year-old in Dublin, who is like 3 or 4 levels from you on an org chart, can they understand what quality means in this organization, because you've developed enough material that they can use it as a reference for their work? So that's kind of the goal, is what does it take to enable, especially as you're scaling, people who are pretty far flung from having that shared understanding of quality.
That's great. And you have a whole,
I can go on forever with that.
That's awesome. And you said you have a blog post on this topic, kind of going through these points. I'll definitely check that out, and I'll put a link to that with this video as well. That's great. So a big part of your books, I have to ask you about it, is talking about the organizational structure itself. So of design in a company. So you kind of go through the 2 very common ways that design teams are typically structured. The first being like that centralized internal service, where it's basically an in-house agency with pools of designers. They're assigned to various requests that are coming into the team. And then once they're done with that work, they kind of go back to the pool and start the process over again. And then that second model is the decentralized and embedded structure. So that's where designers are basically assigned to and work with the various teams within the company. And some of the benefits you point out there is that they get to really know the products, they get to know the target audience they're designing for, and then they're empowered and engaged team members. And typically, as a result, the quality of that work tends to be a bit higher. So those are the 2 typical ways you see in companies organizing and deploying their designers. But then you introduced a third option to consider, which is what you called that centralized partnership. Can you talk a little bit about that? What a centralized partnership is, what it looks like, and why that may be a more suitable structure to take on some of the challenges we're facing?
Yeah. So, what you see are companies, they tend to swing pendulum style between everything centralized, internal agency, or everything embedded, people kind of placed within product teams. And neither of which is a model I like. And you've spelled out many of the reasons why there's challenges there. And so this started for me when I was at Groupon, was trying to figure out, how can I structure sustainable design teams, but in a way that doesn't make it feel like they're an agency in that internal services model. But I see value in centralizing design because I want to ensure coherence across this end-to-end experience, right? One of the biggest problems as a design leader, as a creative leader, the biggest problem I have with the embedded model is you get this fractured, atomized design with all these designers embedded, not talking to each other, just solving problems in isolation. And then you, as the user, as you're experiencing the output of all these teams, you're just kind of being pinballed around. And so I think by centralizing and teamifying design, you enable a design team to work across a broader swath of an experience and really make sure that it hangs together in a coherent way. So that's what led to the centralized partnership. And at the heart of the centralized partnership are design teams. And I don't even know if I stress this. I know I talk about it in the book, but I've really, in the last couple of years, all I want to talk about are design teams. And how do you structure a team of designers to work best? Because I think that's where a lot of the magic is. That's one of those things that I took from working at Adaptive Path, a design consulting firm, and I've been trying to figure out how to embed it in-house, because no design firm has people work has designers work in isolation,
Mhm.
because every design firm knows that's not how you get the best design. You get good design when you have a team of people with the spread of skills and complementary to one another to create that spread of skills working together. That is what leads to quality. So that I'm trying to figure out, how do I have that spread of skills and a team internally, but
Mhm.
without it feeling like they're working in some agency model, stuff coming in, stuff coming out. And so the centralized partnership, this team is working across a set of product teams, and they are in partnership. This team will only ever work with these product teams. You're not going to see this team working with some other set of product teams. They'll only ever work with these product teams. And
Mhm.
so that partnership is important, because the product teams need to feel like the design team is is in for the long haul. Right? This is the issue with the internal with that in-house agency model, is designers leave after a couple months, but the product team is sticking around. Well, those designers, whatever input they have is easy to ignore,
Yeah.
beyond just give us the pixels, please. And so the partnership is crucial in terms of making sure that it feels like the, 5, 6, 7 members of this design team are really invested in the success of the 5 or 6 product teams that they're working across. There's a lot more to the details and mechanics of how it worked,
Yeah.
but primarily it was, uh, by enabling design to operate as a team, you can now deliver a better experience across all these teams. If design is embedded, every designer needs to be this magical unicorn that can do every design thing well.
Mhm.
And that's just not reasonable.
Right.
Um, or if you think it's reasonable, it's because you have a stunted understanding of what it takes to do good design. Because good design isn't just visual design and interaction design. It's copy, it's user research, it's communication, it's leadership. There's so much stuff that goes into it. And so by having a team, you now can have across 5 or 6 people, some who are really great at some things and others who are really great at other things. And maybe they're not so good at some of those things, but when you mix them together,
Yep.
you have your bases covered.
Mhm.
And now you can bring the power of that talented team across all of this stuff. And that's what I was really am driving toward with that centralized partnership model.
Yeah, that was such a great part of the book, and something I loved, that should be in the hands of leadership and businesses and design leadership. So thank you for going through that a little bit. I guess just a couple of last couple of questions. I don't want to keep you much longer. One, the first one, since you wrote this book, it was published in 2016, correct?
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned in the beginning, you've learned since then. So you talked about, perhaps a second edition of this book. I mean, what is something that you would be like, yeah, I'm going to include that in this second edition?
I actually somewhere I don't know if it's in a Google Doc or just in an email draft, have written up kind of what a second edition would look like in terms of
Yeah.
chapters. Um, and key additions. I would talk a lot more about leadership. Design leadership is an area that I've also been digging into in the last 4 or 5 years, in which I is addressed but not really focused on to the extent that is warranted in the book.
Hmm.
The impact that design leaders have, how design leaders show up. I've developed this whole model for thinking about design leadership called Coach. It's based on these 4 archetypes. Coach, how do you manage down? Diplomat, how does a design leader manage across functionally? Champion, how does a
Yeah.
design leader manage up with executives and stakeholders? And then the architect, how does a design leader scale their organization? So I would want to bring that thinking in, just around the importance and power of design leadership, in particular, the role of the team lead, right? So in that centralized partnership we were talking about, you have a team of designers. One of
Yeah.
them is in charge.
Yeah.
That role, that team lead, leading 4, 5, 6 other designers, is the most important role in the design team, because they're overseeing the work of people who are delivering value, but then their peers are, having to coordinate with peers. So now they have this kind of breadth that they are responsible for, and they're having to manage up to deal with those executives and stakeholders. And so there's just a lot that swirls around this role. thinking are crucial. So that's one area I would change or emphasize. You mentioned we have a kind of a professional development levels framework in the book. Since writing that, I've continued to evolve my thoughts on professional development. In the book, we tried to avoid having a explicitly two-track career ladder of individual contributor development and management development. Say, like, we believed in it in the book, but we were trying too hard to keep it simple, and I think we actually made it more harder to understand. So I would introduce an actual two-track career ladder. I also, something that I've spent a lot of time working on last year is developing a taxonomy of design skills and professional skills. So design skills are obvious. Professional skills are like communication skills and facilitation and structuring your work, planning your work, all that kind of stuff. Developing a taxonomy of those skills and then a rubric for assessment. Because one of the things, so I help a lot of companies build out their career ladders. And key to a career ladder is skills building, right? Are you growing, like for a designer, are you growing as a designer? Are you getting better as a designer?
Right.
But there's no common understanding of what better means as a designer. What does it mean to be, on a scale of 1 to 5, what does it mean to be a 3 at visual design and a 4 at visual design and a 5 at visual design? It's one of those things that becomes arbitrary to whomever is doing the judging. So for one client in particular, I developed a pretty robust skills rubric, like to assess skills. That's something I would definitely include in the next edition of the book. We list out skills, but we don't talk about really what it takes to develop them, what it looks like to be an expert at something versus being simply good at it, what it takes to be good at something versus simply to being proficient at it. There was a third thing the third thing I'd probably talk about is the org models that happen as you start getting above 40, and depending on whether or not you have marketing design, we kind of punted on it in terms of certain evolution of a design org. In terms of incorporating marketing, we made it too simple. We're just like marketing designers and product designers working on the same teams, end of story. That never happens. I've never been able to make it happen sustainably. You might have projects where they work together, but really at the end of the day, product and marketing design teams are different and have different ways of working that are necessary.
Right.
I still think they should be part of the same overarching design team, but I think doing a better job recognizing those differences and leaning into that. And then thinking about something that's emerged is thinking about vertical teams that are dedicated to parts of the experience. So in the book, we talk about organizing by customers in their journeys. So we have a marketplace model where you have a buyer team and a seller team. And you can imagine a buyer team would be one of the verticals and a seller team would be another vertical. And you have two teams dedicated to that. But then you might have horizontal teams that support them, right? So design operations. Yes, they would support those verticals, but they would report up. A design program manager isn't going to report to a design manager or design director. They're going to report to a head of design ops.
Right.
A UX researcher is going to report to a head of UX research, not a design manager or design director. So thinking more about kind of verticals and horizontals and how they work together, and being a little more explicit, I guess, about reporting structures, because that's something else we kind of punted on. I think would be in the next edition of the book.
Well, I look forward to all that.
Yes, when you
have free time,
write it. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Now. Well, I'm going to close with this because I can't talk to Peter Merholz without asking about this. And so
I think I know what it is.
You probably know what this is coming. So a very interesting fact about you is that you were the person who coined the word blog. And to me, that is wild and cool. I mean, that word has just become part of our culture, and I imagine many cultures. I mean, what do you think about that? That word you created just took off like that. I mean, if I were you, every time I'd hear the word blog, I'd be like, yeah, that was me.
I'm over that point because you hear the word blog enough where you're just like, okay, I'm over that point. It's awesome. So I've always liked words. I've always been a writer. I was the kid who would, when I didn't know a word, I would just go to the dictionary and look it up.
Yeah.
Like I've always been a words oriented person. I listen to lexicography podcasts. Like I'm that nerd. Mm-hmm. So to have coined a word that caught on is fascinating. Yeah. If only to kind of almost study its trajectory and what can I learn about language through this thing that I took part in. The right now, the only time I get super explicit about the word blog and thinking about it is I play words with friends. And if I can play the word blog, I will play the word blog, even if it's not the best, like most strategic play. Because it's my word and I feel kind of compelled to play that word, even if I have a better hand and should probably play something else.
That's awesome. I love it. Well, Peter, thank you so much for your time and for sharing all that knowledge. So much good information here, not just for designers, but for anyone who is in a leadership position within a company. So thanks again. It was a real privilege talking with you.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure. And thank you for inviting me. I look forward to seeing where this all goes.
I wanted to thank Peter again for his time and thank you for listening to this interview. If you'd like to see more of Peter's work, make sure to check out his website at petermerholz.com. Also, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel so that you can stay up to date with our latest interviews and content. Otherwise, check out our website at uxrocket.io for other resources. Thanks for listening.